So go ahead and click on your examples, your example spreadsheet again, Excel file, and let's look at photos. Let's look at photos stock. All right, so photos, if you remember from our previous frequency distribution visualizations, that tends to be a skewed distribution. So it tends to be that photos are skewed to the right, where there are some people who have an extremely high number of photos, but most people are sort of on one end, so on the lower end. So let's determine what the outlier boundaries are for tagged photos. In order to do that, we might want to start off by finding Q1, max, min, and Q3. So let's go ahead and put in quartile and put in our data for tagged photos, which is right here. And then I'm just going to put in a 1, comma 1. Hit enter. So our first quartile is going to be locked in place, or the data is going to be locked in place, but the first quartile can be different. All right, so our first quartile is 53.75, that's the boundary. And I'm just going to copy and paste that all the way down and just change the quartile that we're referencing. We need the max here, so that's 4. We need the min here, which is 0. And we need quartile 3. Notice that quartile 3 is around 250, but the maximum value is 4,686, right? So I'm guessing we have at least a few outliers here. But in order to find out outliers, we need to find out the IQR, the interquartile range. The interquartile range is really easy once you have quartile 3 and quartile 1, because it's simply quartile 3 minus quartile 1, right? And so instead of having max and min, let's modify this. Oh, actually, yes, modify. Let's modify it to be the upper and lower limit. And so instead of a classic box plot, we're going to be looking at a modified box plot. All right. So instead of this max and this min, we're going to be putting in our formulas for the upper and lower limit. Actually, the min value, we probably don't need it because 13 is probably going to be within the boundary. Like if we made Q1 minus 1.5 times 200, that'll be way lower than our actual minimum value. So we don't actually need to modify that one. Here, let's modify this one though. Here what we do is take our outer boundary plus 1.5 times our interquartile range. Excel knows order of operations, so it'll do the multiplication before it does the addition. So let's hit enter. And notice that our outer boundary is all of a sudden a lot smaller than our maximum value. It's 549.375. Now, it would be nice if we could go back to our data and sort of see really quickly who's in that range and who's not. Who's sort of out of that range? Who are my outliers? So if we go up to the data, what I'm going to show you is now something called conditional formatting. Go ahead and select all the data that we want Excel to look at. What we're going to have Excel do is color these data points if they are outliers. In order to do that, after you select it, go to your menu, which you unfortunately can't see on here, and hit Format. There should be an option that says Conditional Formatting. Go ahead and click on that, and you should get a box that looks something like this. All right. Here we want to say if the cell value is greater than something, then format it differently. So let's see what our outer boundary is again. So if you go to Photos, unfortunately, it won't let you put in a formula unless it's on the same worksheet. But since we're on a different worksheet, we'll just have to put it in manually. So if it's greater than 549.375, right, then format it differently. And so hit Format. And one thing I might want to do is just color it in a different color. And I think I'll put in something like red. Color it in red if it's an outlier. And I'll hit OK. OK again. Ta-da! If you look through this data file, you'll see we already have 2, 3, 4 outliers, 5, 6, 7. So we have about 7 outliers in our data of 100, our sample of 100. And so we know that those 7 or so people aren't going to be included. So in order to do a modified box plot, all we would do is plot these values instead of the max and min. Well, here we keep the min though. So here I'm going to click on, so just select these. And here we're going to use the stock option. Let's see if it'll do it for me on the first try. Unfortunately, no. Gives me this error. So instead, I'm just going to click on something else, just so that I could tell Excel, please organize it differently. And then I'm going to go back to my stock. There we go. I'm going to color this something different. Oh. They're all so light. Let's see. Maybe that one. Okay. All right. And I'm going to delete the series because it's sort of redundant. Here's our tagged photos. And what we see is there's this this range is a lot bigger. Even though there's the same 25% of people in there as well as in here, that's typically what it looks like for a skewed distribution. A skewed distribution will have a small whisker on one end and a large whisker on the other end. Because even though this has the same number of people as there are in this little whisker down here, they're basically, this one just shows you, there's a wider range that captures that same 25% of the people. So this is a right skewed distribution because the top whisker is bigger than the bottom whisker. All right, and one thing we might want to do is label our vertical axis to show number of photos. Just so that we remember, we're not talking about frequency of people here. All right. Now let's use that same idea. Let's use the same data in order to create it with stacked columns. So go ahead and click on stacked columns. And instead of a classic box plot, we're going to be using a modified box plot. Let's put in our quartiles. Quartile and our data right here. And I go back and put in this column. Let's see what we have. Well, we know we want to lock in this data in place. And hit enter, and then I could just drag that down. Now, remember, we want to change this maximum value to be modified. Oops. And in order to do that, we have to find IQR, which is simply Q3 minus Q1. And here I'm just going to delete that and instead put an equal sign, my Q3 plus 1.5 times my IQR, and hit enter. All right. Now let's find the distances between these. The first one, I don't have to do anything with that because it's the distance from 0. The next one, I just subtract C4 from C3, subtract C3 from C4, and then I could copy and paste that all the way down. All right. Now let's plot these distances. I'm going to select all of that, hit Charts, go to Columns, and choose Stacked Columns. Unfortunately, it's not stacking them. So here on my toolbar, I'm going to tell it, organize it differently. And I'm going to delete my series here because that's not something I need. All right, now we have to do all that fancy formatting. The first one, we know we just need to make it clear or transparent. The second one, we know we need to make it transparent as well as putting in a negative error bar, minus error bar. 100% of that box. And up here, we also need that minus error bar, 100% of my box with no fill. Hit OK. And here's what we have. We should probably change that distance because it doesn't help to have distance. We should probably put something like tagged photos. And on the side, we will change our vertical axis so that it reads number of photos. So we know that those are our values. And there we go. We have a modified box plot. It's no longer from 0 all the way to 5,000. It's from 0 to about 600. And notice that it's still a skewed distribution. Even when we chop off those crazy outliers, we still have our sort of bigger, or our whisker that's on top that is a lot longer than our whisker that's on the bottom, even though they both indicate the same 25% of our 100-person sample. All right. So I'm just going to minimize all this, get rid of that. All right, so now we know how to create conditional formatting so that we could signal these people are outliers. We're actually not including them in our visualization. And we just went over modified box plots. The classic box plot relies on the max and min, but those are very susceptible to outliers, right? So if you have a couple of crazy outliers, that will drastically change your visualization. The modified box plot just simply use those modified boundaries. That's 1.5 times the IQR. This is really helpful with highly skewed distributions, as we saw with tagged photos.